Hey there, welcome back to another texture tutorial. This is finally the last video on how to draw rocks and stones. Today we're going to delve into drawing actual rocks and how to actually draw them in a background or landscape. Rocks and stones aren't easy to draw for anyone. Their irregular shapes and complicated shadows can be quite a challenge for both beginners and experienced artists. These simple tricks and exercises will help you find the right technique to get much better at drawing rocks. If you start with the simplest possible way of drawing rocks and learn that, you can move on to a difficulty one level above it, and so on. It's more rewarding to succeed at something simple than to struggle with something difficult. Especially if you're a stranger to this topic, there's obviously no pressure to create a masterpiece with rocks. Rocks are solid components of most landscapes. Just for a bit of background knowledge, broadly speaking, there are three major types of rock. Number one, rocks formed from cooled magma. Number two, pre-existing rocks changed by pressure and heat. Number three, rocks formed by the accumulating of layers of sediments, particles of other rocks, plants, or animals over time. Here we have different rocks of each type. I'm a stone collector. I've been collecting these for many years. What's interesting for us as artists is that even within these groups, rocks come in different shapes, sizes, and textures. Some are very coarse, and others can be layered, smooth, or even glassy. They can be solid or porous, very hard, or super crumbly. Rocks come in many different shapes, sizes, colors, and textures. Your sketches should take these characteristics into account. Mountains and equal terrain tend to have a sharp, coarse look to them, whereas river pebbles are often rounded due to the continuous movement by the flowing water. Colors can also be vastly different, even within parts of the same rock formation. We often think of them as mostly gray or brown, but there are thousands of shades between these extremes and many others a lot more colorful. As an artist, you don't need to know the name, formation process, or chemical composition of what you're drawing, but you should develop an eye for different types of rock and their defining characteristics. It will make your drawings a lot richer. One of the most important things for you to realize is that as complicated as some rocks may look, they all consist of very simple underlying geometric shapes. Once you learn to see these, it'll be much easier for you to draw them convincingly. Try to enjoy drawing rocks with all their special textures rather than being intimidated by them. They can be a lot of fun once you relax into it and stop aiming for perfection. Wherever I traveled, especially in natural places like dense forests, along the shores of the sea, beside the rivers, or even on the foothills, stones and their interesting and unique shapes always captured my attention. I found myself mostly fascinated by stones in the third category, stones with particles of other rocks, plants, or animals, or traces of ancient life forms. There are many approaches to drawing rocks and stones, from abstract to photorealistic and everything in between. In the previous, we went through learning the texture of a rock and how to work on details to draw a realistic rock drawing. And then I showed you how to draw a simple stone in a step-by-step sketching tutorial. So definitely check that video first. Here we're gonna go through some more examples and specific methods to learn how to draw actual rocks and stones. Here you can see two examples. The first sketch is very rough, but as you see, even though there's no shading or detail, you can easily see the pebble shore. The second drawing, on the other hand, is very realistic and would have taken quite a while. It's entirely up to our personal preference and how much time we have or how realistic we want our drawing. I prefer to choose the first method when it's my sketching day or when I'm out in nature or in the country and I see an interesting rock formation that I just want to quickly capture. Then I can choose one of my sketches or one of the photos I took, decide on the final composition to turn it into a real drawing with much more detail in my workplace. While it is true that rocks and mountains are not the most popular subject in the arts, I have found some wonderful artists and their artworks for you to see their different approaches in capturing the essence and texture of the rocks. Note how very different their approaches and the level of detail and texture are, yet they all reveal a lot of experience and look simply terrific. After all of this, let's go through some steps to get better at drawing rocks. In the first place, understanding rocks is crucial. So, why not take a little walk outside to observe them firsthand? Personally, I find this activity quite refreshing. Study on rocks and their various qualities and properties, and take notice of the different kinds of rocks you'll find in your area. Leave your sketchbook behind this time. It's all about observing. Instead, you can bring along a pocket notebook to write down your findings and observations. Pay close attention to the color and size variations as you explore. See what you can find. Pick up some rocks and touch them, and feel their surfaces to better understand their textures. It's a lot easier to get to know the texture this way. See if they're rough, smooth, light or dark, clean or dirty. Take note on the edges, cracks, grooves, and any distinct patterns or formations you come across. This hands-on approach makes it much easier to familiarize yourself with the diverse characteristics of rocks. Step 2. Start with the outlines. For this exercise, simply select a few rocks from outdoors or your home collection and sketch their outlines. Sketch the stone with soft, gentle, flowing lines. Avoid sharp strokes. These lines will serve as your initial guideline. There's no need to add shading or details at this stage. Just focus on the basic silhouettes. See if you can stack them or create some overlapping to add depth to your sketches. I find it easiest to start off with some rough shapes using very light lines and then refine them one by one gradually. Imagine the stone as a box or a three-dimensional form with subtle edges to grasp the shape. Begin by outlining the overall shape of each stone. While your outlines don't have to be perfectly accurate, they should convey the rough shape of the rock and ideally hint at the texture. Continue with this practice until you're used to it. Then move on to the next exercise. Step 3. Practice geometric shapes. When you break rocks down into their simplest forms, they can often form the shapes of squares, circles, and triangles. Remember that rocks are three-dimensional closed shapes. So drawing something like a cube, a cylinder, a sphere, or even a cone will much better represent what a rock actually looks like. Of course, this is just a start. You need to add a lot more detail to it to make it look more like a rock. Consistently drawing different geometric shapes is incredibly useful for all kinds of subjects, from still life to architecture. Human figures, animals, flowers and plants, basically anything you can imagine, including mountains and rocks. Ideally, try to incorporate a short session of practicing different shapes into your daily routine or before each sketching session, just like a simple warm-up exercise we do before starting the actual task. Experiment with drawing cubes, pyramids, circles, and more. Getting familiar with these shapes in and out and their contours, especially how the major shadows are cast, will come in handy during the next few steps of your drawing process. By the way, if you have trouble drawing these shapes and how to shade them, you can check the link above. Step 4. Light source. Considering the light source is essential in any drawing and painting, it really influences the overall look and feel of the artwork. In nature, sunlight is typically the primary light source, casting shadows from above in most situations. However, when you're working indoors, whether at home or in your studio, you have the choice to experiment with various light sources to observe how they affect your subject and your drawing. If you're a beginner, I suggest starting with a consistent subtle light source for your practice sessions. This helps you to focus on the shape and how to capture it better without getting frustrated by variations in lighting conditions and the complexity of the object. Focus on the design and a sketch of the stone, filling it with a consistent base value to establish its foundation. Imagine the direction of the light. For instance, let's say it's coming from the left, so the surfaces facing the top look lighter because they're facing the light. Next, create a gradual transition from light to dark on these surfaces to represent how the light interacts with the stone's texture. Once you're satisfied with the overall lighting and shading, refine the details by carving out finer shapes. Step 5. Learn to see the planes. Have a look at the rocks and try to find their major and primary planes. There are the surfaces that are angled in a specific direction, catching light from a particular source. Even the most complicated rocks are made of basic planes with underlying geometric shapes. Although these planes may not always be perfectly straight or smooth, with some patience you'll begin to recognize them, so it can take a while. Paying attention to variations in shadow intensity will help you with that, as different angles receive different amount of lights. Once you've identified the planes, you can simplify and straighten your lines accordingly. Adding shading can further indicate which surfaces are facing the sun and which are in shadow. For my quick sketches, I often use hatching or cross-hatching techniques. It's a super easy method to beautifully capture it as quick as possible. Step 6. Major planes and shadows. Now that you've developed an eye for identifying planes in the rock formations around you, it's time to put it into practice. Begin by sketching the outlines of some rocks in your surroundings. Then refine the shapes by adding the major planes. Feel free to add some rough shading to give depth to your sketches if you like. Keep in mind that your drawing doesn't need to be absolutely faithful to the original. You can change and simplify wherever you like. If you're not entirely sure about a particular plane, go ahead and make a guess without overthinking it. Now, the principle to create more complicated rock patterns with more planes is exactly the same as with the major ones. The size and number of planes in any given rock simply depends on how detailed you want your drawing to be. Gradually add these planes layer by layer, breaking down the major ones into smaller segments until you're satisfied with the level of detail. Now add varied values to create shadows, emphasizing the distribution of light and shadow. Lighter values will illuminate the upper planes of the stone. Step 7. Edges. For most rocks, it's a good idea to give at least some visual indication as to their edges. These are basically just changes of planes where one area meets another with a different angle. Rocks often have some relatively sharp edges, perhaps where parts of them were knocked off by a storm or falling debris. Those look great if you draw them with dark, sharp, and crisp lines to enhance their definition. Other changes in angle are smoother and are best drawn with a lighter line, just subtle shadows, or even entirely left out depending on the desired effect. Rock formation illustrates changes in planes. Smooth, like this one, medium, like in this example, and sharp, like this one. Step 8. Cracks. Many rocks have cracks from eons of water freezing and thawing, or simply from falling off a mountainside. Those cracks can be a visually very striking feature and should definitely be included in your sketch. Some boulders are just naturally beautiful. Look at this great example with cracks and plants growing in between. Map out where the cracks go, using lighter strokes on the lit up spots to make things pop. Add in more details with a harder pencil. For lighting purposes, use lighter values to create the highlights. Remember, perfection is not always necessary. Prioritize adhering to general rules before delving into specifics. Each rock and stone has its own unique texture and qualities based on their environment, their formation process, or chemical composition. We can create intersecting curves on the surface, and don't forget to add some gaps between them. Draw some broken verticals and strokes randomly, and draw some straight and diagonal lines and random strokes. And finally, for the last step, let's move on to detailing the object, deepening the shadows, and enhancing highlights using a proper pencil. This will add depth and realism to your artwork. The final step to creating a unique sketch is to add some detail. Now is a good time to darken some areas to create a more pleasing contrast. Usually that's the cracks, of course, the foot of the rocks, and any area that receives little to no light. Depending on your drawing style, you could also play around with some texture. Find out what the rock feels like to the touch if you can safely reach it. If it's smooth, you can try smudging. If it's super rough, scribbling, hatching, or cross-hatching could work nicely. You don't need to add texture everywhere. Some hints here and there are usually enough, and the viewer's brain will fill in the blanks. In quick sketches, leaving some things to the imagination is often part of a good composition. Refining the details on the stone, adjusting shadows with varying values for depth. If you're unsatisfied with your stones, just add some grass or dirt to give your picture a bit of a spice. You can draw blades of grass around your stone and add some textures by scribbling to enhance the composition of your drawing. Now it's time for some cleanup. I continue to refine the details on the stones. Sometimes I go over the shadows using different values for different spots. Basically, we're all finished, but I like to add lots of details to my environment. This process ensures your stone drawing captures the essence of realism while allowing room for creativity and expression. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know in the comments. For the next tutorial, we're gonna delve into studying some wood texture. So I'll see you soon for the next one. Take care, guys.